Hello, friends, and welcome to a members Chabura Shiur. Tonight we have with us a regular, Rabbi Yosef Zarnighian, a speaker who needs no introduction, and I highly recommend to dive back into our Shiur archives and check out all his wonderful Shiurim with us. Tonight is also actually a night for us in the States, and we're excited for our first America friendlier time zone Shiur. Tonight, we will also be exploring a very interesting topic, confidentiality and confession in Halakha. In Chabura News, that press just launched a new title, Understanding Megillat Esther, a pirush on the Megillah from Rav Yosef ibn Kaspi. So make sure to get yourself a copy before the upcoming Moed. Thank you here for people who are here live. Thank you everyone who's going to be listening afterwards. And Rav, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ohad. Good evening, everyone. And we're going to explore a very significant topic that, in my opinion, actually deserves a good deal of exposure, even though this is perhaps by way of introduction, because when it comes to confidentiality and maintaining one's secrets and the secrets of others, people often associate this, especially in the West, with the role that medical professionals and clergy and perhaps law enforcement and other such officials play in the public sphere. However, as we're going to explore tonight, that is not the case for how the Torah outlines our responsibilities as Jews with regard to maintaining the confidentiality of our fellow human beings. We're also going to explore the comparative development of confidentiality in halakha as contrasted with the way it developed in uh, Christian dogma and thought. Because, as many are aware, this is one of the defining features of both Catholic and Orthodox Christian traditions, the seal of confession and the exclusive right of clergy to maintain this, what they believe to be the most sacred of responsibilities. So, like we always begin, we have to establish our principles with sources from the Mikra, from the Hebrew Bible. There's a pasuk in Mishle in the 11th chapter of Proverbs, which, if you take a look at the commentaries there, they seem to divorce verse 12 from verse 13. But I'm going to suggest actually how they are connected. The pasuk says, "Baz lere'ehu chasar lev veish tevunot yacharish." He who disgraces his fellow is lacking of heart, does not have discernment, or he doesn't know how to read the room. Veish tevunot yacharish. But a discerning individual will remain silent. Comes the next verse and says, Holech Rachil Megale Sod. Who is he who goes about spreading slander? This is one who is Megale Sod, who reveals a secret. Vene'eman Ruach Mechase Davar. And he who is trustworthy of spirit is he who conceals a matter. You see from here that uh, these two verses, in my view, again, this is something that surprisingly is not echoed by Metzudat David, by the Radak, by Rashi, by many of the commentators, but it makes perfect sense to me, and we're going to see there are sources that support this from our Chachamim, that the discerning individual who is silent about what? He is silent about the Gilui Hasod, revealing of the secret, as the verse right after verse 12 in the 11th chapter of Mishle reveals. You see also in the Midrash Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah, relating the incident of Dinah and the unfortunate tragedy that she faced with the abuse that she faced from Shechem. And the Torah says that Yaakov, Dinah's father, upon learning of this tragedy, did not speak of it. The Torah says, "Ve'echerish Yaakov ad Moam." Yaakov stayed silent about this matter of the rape of Dinah until the brothers, his sons, arrived. Hadahu dichtiv. The Midrash says this fulfills that which it says in Mishle that we just read. Ve'ish tevunot yacharish. Not every matter of grave concern has to be revealed immediately. Of course, the brothers would end up learning of Dinah's a tragic abuse. But it wasn't something that Yaakov, on the spot, decided to reveal to others without prudently thinking about it. And even after prudently disclosing the details of that incident, it seems to have only been revealed to his sons and to no one else. The Gemara in Sanhedrin goes further in analyzing the status of a book which we have quoted in the past, the Proverbs of Ben Sirah. And here the Talmud is discerning why the book of Ben Sirah was not canonized. For those of you who may not be familiar with the ins and outs of this, I refer you to our Chabura lecture on the story of the Maccabees and the biblical canon. Um, so the Gemara says if you want to make the argument that it wasn't canonized because there's a verse in the Proverbs of Ben Sirah that says, La ta'el devaya beribach, don't bring worry into your heart, right? De gavre gibarin ketal devaya. Many mighty people have fallen due to worry and stress. Now, by the way, nothing controversial about that statement. We know stress is the ultimate silent killer. And you don't have to be a psychologist to realize this. This is something that every human being knows. But the Gemara doubles down on this theory and says, Ha Shlomo Amira. Shlomo HaMelech in the Proverbs already uh, echoed a similar sentiment, which we're going to analyze at length, by the way. This verse we're going to analyze at length. The verse in Mishle says, De'aga velev ish yashchena. Now, the word yashchena is the operative clause over here. We're going to analyze in a second what this means on a simple level. Peshat. We always have to refer to Peshat. Right? This is the famous comment of the Ramban when the Ramban says that en mikra yotze mideh peshuto, right? That the verses of the Hebrew Bible cannot depart from the straightforward meaning. It doesn't mean that they are only analyzed by their simple meaning and no other level of interpretation, but rather that the peshat, the straightforward rendition of a verse, serves as the base, the foundation for subsequent levels of interpretation. So the simple meaning is to quash, to subdue. If a person has a de'aga, a worry in his heart, you should quash it. Obviously, that doesn't mean suppress your feelings. It means it has to be quashed in a constructive and an appropriate manner, of course. However, an additional level of interpretation over here is as follows. The Gemara says, Rabbi Amev, Rabbi Aseh, the two following views of Rabbi Ameh and Rabbi Aseh are as follows. We don't know who said what. Chadamar, one view said, Yasichena mida'ato. Let this flee from his thoughts. Go think about other things. Go focus on other matters. Don't fixate on the worries of your heart. The other opinion says, you should talk about it with others. Now, how does a person remove these thoughts of worry and stress from his mind, according to the view that says you should focus on other things? Rashi, in his commentary to Mishle on that verse, says, Yasok b'Torah. You should engage in the study of Torah. How do we know that? Because the next clause in that verse reads, V'davar tov yesamechena. A good thing will make that person happy. And that good thing, of course, is in reference to Torah. This is also alluded to in the famous verse in Tehillim, in the book of Tehillim, when David HaMelech says, Pikudei Adonai yesharim esamechedev. The instructions of God are most upright. They make a person glad. Right? That's why when, God forbid, if a person is in avelut, he's in mourning, one of the things that he cannot do is study Torah because it makes him happy and it distracts him from mourning, right? And sometimes There are periods in our lives where we do have to worry, and the 7-day period of mourning upon the loss of a loved one is one of those periods. At any rate, the Rashi continues and says, according to the other opinion that says you should speak about it, yasichena, not yashchena, but read differently, yaschena, utter it and speak of it to others. How does that opinion reconcile the next part of the verse, which reads that a good thing makes a person glad? So Rashi says this is in reference to one's friends hearing about one's problems, that a person's friend will give him consolation, hopefully. If you have a good friend and you're venting to the friend, or maybe you have a therapist, maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be a friend, but you have another person that you're going to give you consolation and comfort. This is a source of simcha. Yesamach et hadeaga. It gladdens a person from feeling this form of worry. Alternatively, Rashi in his commentary to Masechet Yoma points out that what does it mean that you should be yesichena la'acherim, according to the view that says that you should retell or vent or relate your problems to another. What is the purpose of that? Very interesting. There's a disagreement between Rashi and Rabbi Natan Miromi, the famous author of the Aruch dictionary, perhaps one of the most underutilized and valuable of early Jewish sources for providing very accurate and precise definition of key terms in the Talmud. So Rashi's opinion is you should relate your problems to others. Shema yisa'uhu alza. Maybe your friends will give you some good advice to solve your problems. In other words, Rashi, if you paint a full picture of his comments, very often, by the way, just as a side note, it's important to know that when we are studying the works of the great Rishonim, the great medieval scholars, our great medieval Chachamim, you cannot always read a statement in a vacuum and assume that the view of that particular author, of that particular Rishon, ends there. Sometimes you have to cross-reference, particularly in the works of Harambam, to gain a full picture of a particular topic between the various works and sources that Harambam has authored for us. And in this case, Rashi teaches us the same thing. In one place, he says, you relate your problems to others so that people can console you and comfort you, but also that they should offer you some advice. That's a good lesson for us when we are hearing the troubles of our friends and fellows. You shouldn't leave them hanging without any advice. But the Aruch disagrees. He says you should relate your problems to others. Perush, why relate your problems to others? This is so that they should pray for you, right? If you, for those who were part of our lecture earlier this month on the topic of, or earlier last month, excuse me, on the topic of praying and prayer for others. I refer you to that for further detail on this topic. But the Aruch relates that part of the healing process in stress and worry is to share your concerns with others in order for you not to be alone in your prayers to Borei Olam for salvation. That a person's problems are shared by the community, not only in receiving help, but also in the fact that they pray for your well-being, or, hopefully that they should. Yeah, this is a very important thing. People often assume that when it comes to problems of the heart and mind, that the level and urgency of treatment that is needed is not as severe as a person who is facing some sort of a physical ailment or physical illness. In a recently uncovered midrash, it's one of the more obscure midrashim, Midrash Otiyot Rabbi Akiva. The midrash relates that it's a powerful line. It says that the heart, שהלב שקול כנגד כל איבריו של אדם. אדם מנחם, אף הלב מנחם. Just like a person has blood pumping throughout his entire body and keeping him alive, right? That the heart, in other words, is the most fundamental and central of organs in the body, so too when a person is consoled by the heart, when he is consoled in a genuine and sincere way, it is as if a person's entire essence is sustained and saved by being consoled mentally, emotionally. How do we know that? We know that because Yosef, in consoling his brothers, when his brothers feel awful and terrible for the evil crime of selling him into slavery and fearing retribution from Yosef, Yosef says, of course, "Vayinachem otam vaydaber al libam." He consoled his brothers and spoke to their hearts. He didn't just dismiss their worries as being ridiculous and not true, but he realized that the brothers were fearing matters that were beyond logic. Their fear had an emotional basis that needed consolation of the heart. I love this comment from Avot Rabbi Natan. Avot Rabbi Natan, for those who are not familiar, is the earliest commentary, or I guess you could call it an elucidation of the famous Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, that is studied far and wide, Jew and non-Jew. But the elucidation, Avot Rabbi Natan, is unfortunately not as widely studied. It can shed some very, very interesting light on the statements found in Pirkei Avot, because we have a famous Mishnah which reads, "Aseh lecha rav," a person should make for himself a teacher, a rabbi, ukneh lecha chaver, you have to acquire a friend for yourself. Pirkei Avot doesn't elaborate on that point, but here in Avot Rabbi Natan, in the 8th chapter, we have an elaboration. How do you how do you acquire a friend, right? What is this language of acquiring a friend? A lot of the mefarshim, a lot of the commentators elaborate on this point. This is the earliest understanding of how and why a person should acquire a friend. Not have a friend. No, acquire a friend. Sheikneh adam chaver la'atzmo, a person should go out of one's way to find and make for yourself, designate for yourself, as if this person is designated for you, like a kinyan, like an acquisition. Sheyochal imo, to eat with you, veishte imo, and to drink with you, veikra imo, and to study the Torah and the words of our Chachamim, shane imo, veyishan imo, and to even go to sleep with this individual, to have a roommate. Vegalelo kol sitarav, and to reveal all of one's secrets to. You should have a confidant. Seter Torah v'seter derech eretz, whether these are holy or sacred secrets that one has, and also mundane secrets, day-to-day secrets. There's some discussion about what it means to reveal one's sitre Torah. That's an interesting discussion. Some of the commentators point out that refers to revealing the actual esoteric and metaphysical studies of the Torah, that in light of what our sages say elsewhere, that you have to, that one who is on the level to teach such matters has to transmit it, and may do so only to a single student, to one student at a time, umevin midato, and he has to be one who picks up on the very brief and succinct lessons, and to draw out the second and third order effects of those lessons on his own. So others say that it refers to Torah insights which are not to be made public. At any rate, this is a very important point that's stressed by the Avot Rabbi Natan as a basic human need. And this point would also be echoed in a moral sense, since we mentioned Yosef and his brothers. Ramban, in his commentary to the Torah, points out, and this is a controversial opinion, but it's nevertheless the opinion that Nachmanides, Ramban, held, Famous question. Did Yosef and the brothers, or excuse me, did Yosef or the brothers ever reveal to Yaakov, their father, what truly happened all those years prior, all those decades prior when they sold Yosef? Did Yaakov know the full story before he died? It's a good question. Radak in his commentary to the Torah says we don't know. Can go either way. Ramban says no. Yireli al derech peshat. According to the simple understanding, shelo hugad leYaakov kol yamav ki echav macheru et Yosef. Yaakov never knew the true fate of Yosef. It was never told to him. He thought that maybe he was roaming in the field and he got lost because Yaakov sent him, remember? Yaakov said, Lechna re'et shalom achecha bet shalom hatzon v'ashiveni davar. Go look and to see how your brothers are tending to the flock and to the sheep and come and report back to me, right? So he thought maybe he got lost, he got eaten by some wild beasts. He didn't truly know what happened at the end of the day because nobody revealed it to him. Why? The brothers feared that perhaps their fate would be the fate of what would happen ultimately to Shimon and Levi. Shimon and Levi Reuven, Shimon and Levi were not given such positive blessings, shall we say, upon Yaakov's blessings to his children when he was on his deathbed to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi for various transgressions they committed in their lives. And so the brothers knew that this tendency existed within Yaakov, and they didn't want to get on his bad side. So that's Ramban's opinion. But here, look at this. Now Yosef didn't tell his dad about this. Musaro hatov, because of his proper and good demeanor, out of proper ethical consideration, lo ratza lahagid lo. He didn't want to tell dad what happened. So it's none of his business. With all due respect, it's not something that is going to affect Yaakov's life one way or another, right? Now, up until this point, we've been talking about how important it is to have a confidential outlet and how important it is for us to maintain confidentiality. As a chaplain in the United States Air Force, and this is true for those who are serving as chaplains in other branches of the United States military as well, there's a very famous motto that us chaplains have to allow our troops, our airmen, our sailors to feel comfortable coming to us. And it's true. We tell them that whatever you share with us is absolutely and 100% confidential. Their communication is privileged communication legally, and whatever they say can never be disclosed to any other human being on this planet under any circumstance and for any reason. So you can think of the most extreme example, and I don't have to spell out explicitly what that would look like. And we still have to maintain that with the utmost confidence and not share it with anybody. But that's the policy here in the United States. According to Halakha, a person, and this is echoed first in the Sifra, later in the Sifre, that a person is forbidden to withhold edut, testimony against an individual who, as we shall see in a moment, commits various capital offenses against another Jew, against another human being for that matter. This is in violation if a person still withholds that information from Bet Din, from court. That is in violation of the biblical prohibition, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You shall not stand by idly by the blood of your brother. Right? And here the Sifra comments further and says, how do you know that you have in the American legal system we refer to this as Good Samaritan laws. How do you know that if you see a person drowning or being robbed or uh, being attacked by a wild beast, that you have to do whatever it takes to save this person. Talmud lomar lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. You cannot. That's what the verse means when it says, "Don't stand by idly by the blood of your brother." Right, and the same thing applies. The Sifra says, but if a person is being chased in hot pursuit, if a person is chased and is going to, God forbid, be raped, you have an obligation to save that individual, even if it means that you have to kill the pursuer. Now, ideally, we do whatever we can to incapacitate, right? A halakha does not allow for resorting to killing another human being uh, as a first means of saving the victim. But if needed, if there's no other way, then that would be warranted in self-defense. And if the victim cannot defend himself in self-defense, you have an obligation, the bystander, to save that person in defense of protecting innocent life. And that includes not being silent. You cannot be silent in the trial against such criminals. So sometimes spilling the beans and revealing horrible facts about a tragedy that has occurred is not only warranted, but it is required according to Halakha. The Mishnah and Sanhedrin takes this one step further. The Mishnah refers to a case where the court, the Sanhedrin, and by the way, this also is applicable to inferior courts that do not hold the official status of being one of the courts of the Sanhedrin, whether it was the Great Sanhedrin or one of the inferior courts of the Sanhedrin. Even courts nowadays, Jewish courts nowadays, would have to abide by the following principle. When a verdict in a case is issued by the court, the Mishnah says that the judges would announce, or the court would announce, Ish peloni ata zakai, ish peloni ata chayav. You, sir, are innocent. You, sir, are guilty. Or you, sir, are liable. You, sir, are not liable. And so on and so forth. Now, says the Mishnah, Uminayin cheshiyatza lo yomar. From where do we derive? What is the verse that bases the principle for us, the legal principle, that prohibits a judge from telling the litigants as follows? Ani hu hamezakeh v'chaverai mechayevim. Just so you know, John Doe, I ruled in your favor, but what can I do? My colleagues on the court, they're good for nothings. They ruled against you. I was outvoted. Judge is not allowed to speak that way. How do we know that? What can I do? My colleagues outvoted me. Where do you know it's prohibited to say that? It's the verse in Mishle that we read earlier, that verse from Proverbs 11, which says, he who spreads slander is he who reveals secrets. And the Gemara, commenting on or expanding the parameters of this prohibition in the Mishnah, the Gemara states that this also referred to students in the Bet Midrash. There was a matter which was ruled in in a particular academy. We don't know which academy. In the Bet Midrashah. The commentators over here are not entirely clear about what this refers to. In my opinion, I may very well be wrong, but in my opinion, this wasn't a judicial proceeding, as the Bet Midrash did not issue rulings on judicial proceedings, but instead it was in all likelihood a gezerah, an edict that was issued, which we find very often the Gemara will record an edict that is issued by the sages without reason, without uh, judicial reasoning explaining the decision. And sometimes the judicial reasoning is not revealed until a year or many years later. Why is that? So the Gemara points out in a number of places that this was done in order for people not to outwit or think that they could outwit the justification of the sages. For every argument, there is a counter argument, as they say. So they issue the edict spreads, and then once people have accepted, they could provide the reasoning. So there was a particular student who revealed the reasoning of an edict for whatever reason he felt justified in doing that, and he was not allowed to. And the Rab Ameh from this particular academy said, Amar, he declared about the student, Den galer azya. This is a revealer of confidential and classified information, and that student was reprimanded for this. It was inappropriate of him to do so. So we also find this idea of maintaining one's secrets as a matter of proper ethical behavior in a comment that Rabbeinu Hameiri makes, the great Rabbi Menachem Hameiri, in his commentary to Masechet Yoma, relates, when you see over and over the Torah recording, and God said to Moses saying, Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor, what is the purpose of the Torah using this seemingly redundant phrase, lemor, saying? The Torah could always simply tell us, and God said to Moses, colon, XYZ, whatever it is that the statement may be. The Meiri says, saying, God said to Moses, saying, teaches us, lamadnu derech eretz. From here we learn proper etiquette and ethical behavior. Lemi she'omer davar lachavero, regarding something that is said to one's colleague. Af al pi shelo masra lo besod, even though something may have been said to an individual without the explicit disclosure that the party wants to keep the information confidential. Nevertheless, a person should assume, as a matter of proper ethical behavior, shehu bival yomar, that information should not be shared with others freely. Ela im ken amar lo bal davar shehu omer lo otan advarim. Right? That a person should ideally explicitly give permission, even for the most mundane of things, to be said to others if you're sharing it to somebody in a private manner. Obviously, if a person is speaking in a public manner, then it's not a secret. But if it's being told to somebody one-on-one in a secret way, you should assume, as a matter of proper etiquette, that it is not appropriate to share to share this with others. Here is a very interesting, perhaps one of the first teshuvot, one of the first of legal response by one of my favorite chachamim of the 17th century, Rabbi Moshe ibn Habib, the great Dayan, the great rabbinical judge of Yerushalayim. He writes in his responsa, his She'elot Tshuvot Kol Gadol, about the status of a letter, mail, that one found already open in a public area, right? He rules that if you find a letter or material that is publicly available and readable, that the presumption of the recipient wanting to keep this letter confidential no longer exists. You do not have to assume that something that is available and readable to the public is classified information. אבל איני מתיר מהן טעמי דכתיב נא לראות בכתב ששולח אדם לחברו. Having said that, he says, I do not permit with this legal justification for a person to read that a letter which was sent to another recipient. Mishum de'afilu deleta hashta letakanat Rabbeinu Gershom, even though you can make the argument here, Ibn Habib is referring to an edict that was issued by the famous 10th century Ashkenazic sage Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom, famous for many other edicts, perhaps most famous for his edict against Ashkenazi marrying two wives, also issued an edict that prohibits individuals from reading another's mail or letters without their consent. So he says, even if you want to make the argument that this edict no longer applies, nirali de medina asur lirot bichtav chavero, by letter of the law, pre-existing rabbinic law, perhaps pre-existing Torah law, it is forbidden to read a person's letter or mail that was sent to him privately. Especially if it's coming sealed in an envelope. And he tries to prove this from a source where Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, talks about a case where somebody left a Torah scroll, Sefer Torah, with his friend. According to Jewish law, Shulchan Aruch says you can scroll this Torah, you can move it once every 12 months. And when you do so, ve'im keshehu golelo potecha, I think there's a typo there. When he is scrolling it to maintain, this was done to maintain the structural integrity of the scroll. If you're opening it up and in doing so you are you choose to read from it, mutar, that's fine. But you shouldn't do so willy-nilly just for the sake of saying, well, it's with me, it's not being used, I might as well learn from it. No, not true. This is also true for other books that may be in one's possession for safekeeping. Just like it's forbidden because it's not being left with you for safekeeping to read from. It's being kept with you for safekeeping. So just like it is forbidden to read this scroll in an unauthorized manner, so too is it forbidden to copy from this text for your own use. Afilu ot achad, even if you're just jotting down a single letter, right? He quotes from some other opinions. The Rama, Rabbi Moshe Yisraelis gives some exceptions, but as a general rule, this is forbidden. And this position was also reiterated by the famous Sephardic rabbi Rabbi Chaim Palaji in his work Hikekei Lev, and we'll go through a few more sources indicating the parameters of and the importance of maintaining confidentiality. Rabbeinu Yonah, in his famous ethical work Sha'arei Teshuvah, has an entire paragraph devoted to the topic of confidentiality, and he says that a person has to keep information shared with him in confidence a secret, even if there is no slander or defamatory information that is shared when a person confides in you. There could be detrimental harm that is unforeseen in you sharing this information with others. And it could perhaps even give reason for your friend to lose trust in you. And this is a terrible ethical breach in trust, says Rabbeinu Yonah. He says similarly, another reason, it's a breach of derech haseniut. It's a breach of modest and proper conduct, unbecoming of a Jew. This constitutes a breach of of da'at. You can call it perhaps a form of genevat da'at. It's as echoed by Ibn Habib earlier. It's almost like a form of intellectual property that's being vested in you. And sharing that with others would, in a way, almost be like sharing intellectual property that you are not authorized to share. Commenting on the verse, Holech Rachil Megale Sod, he who slanders is one who reveals secrets. He says, Rabbeinu Yonah comments and says, if you see somebody is babbling and is sharing, he tends to share people's secrets in public, even if you find there's no like slander or defamatory things being said um, by this person sharing these things, you are by default being rachil. You are by default slandering that person, even if it doesn't appear to be that way from the content being shared. I'll end off with one point over here regarding Rabbeinu Yonah takes this further than any of the other opinions that we saw earlier. He says, "Vehuzarnu mina Torah." It's a biblical violation to accept that which a person shares with another if it is confidential information and unauthorized to be shared, based on another prohibition. It's based on the prohibition of Kabbalat Lashon Hara, the prohibition to accept Lashon Hara, Shneemar, Lo tisa Shem Ashav. A person is not allowed to accept a unilateral testimony. Whatever you're saying, it's only coming from you. You cannot be sharing this. So this is, according to Rabbi Yonah, in constitution of a biblical prohibition, actually. Sometimes the person may think that they're sharing information and sharing it is actually a Kiddush Hashem. It's glorifying God's name. You doing this is not a bad thing. It's not a breach of confidence, but it glorifies the name of God. We find this in the episode. The Talmud Yerushalmi relates in Masechet Sanhedrin of the Yerushalmi. The Talmud relates an incident regarding the prophet Elisha. If you remember this incident from, I think it's in the fourth chapter of Melachim Bet, where the prophet Elisha tells his lad Gehazi about the Isha, the woman from Shunem. We referred to this last time also in our lecture about prayer and praying for others. But very briefly, this woman tended to, this is also the Haftarah that we read for Machar Chodesh. And the the Navi says that this woman who hosts us all the time is so generous with us in providing for us when we pass by her. As she herself says, he's over alenu tamid. He passes by us all the time, and we have to take care of the prophet. She says this to her husband. And the the Navi Elisha says to Gehazi, we have to repay her. And she's not accepting anything. So Gehazi says, she doesn't have a son. Maybe you could pray for her to have a son. Sure enough, they have a child. Child gets sick. The child says, Roshi, Roshi, my head, my head. And ultimately, it's a question how you read this verse, but according to one opinion, he dies. According to one opinion, he's unconscious. At any rate, Elisha hears about this because, and this is why we read this portion on Rosh Chodesh, because her husband says, "Why go into the prophet today? Lo Chodesh v'lo Shabbat. It's not Rosh Chodesh. It's not Shabbat. There's no reason for you to go see the prophet." And she says, "Shalom. Don't worry about it." So she goes to the Navi Elisha, tells him about what's going on. Elisha comes and sends Gehazi to revive this boy. Okay, that's the background. Now, the Yerushalmi says about this, we find regarding Elisha, when he sent Gehazi to revive the son of this Shunammite woman. By the way, you see from here, I mentioned this in the prayer in the lecture on prayer from last month, that this woman may or may not have even been Jewish. We don't know, but this shows you to what extent the Hebrew prophets cared for and cherished every single human life. That they were willing to even perform miracles like resurrecting the dead for people who are not of their own tribe. And we see this same sentiment that's echoed and practiced and lived every single day with our Jewish first responders, Magen David Adom, Hatzalah, and so on. So I want to also just briefly give them credit for that. At any rate, the prophet Elisha says, Kach mishanti beyadecha, take my staff with you and go, valech. And the text of the Navi says, Ki timsa ish lo tevarechenu. When you find a person on the way, don't greet him. And if someone greets you, don't respond to them. Keep that instruction of the Prophet Elisha in mind. Vehu gehazi la'abed ken. He didn't do that. Ela kad pega bar nashbe ve'amar le. When he encountered somebody, they asked him, Me'ain ula'ain gehazi. Where are you going to, Gehazi? Why are you not with your teacher Elisha? Vehu amar le. And he would tell the passerby, Ana azilum chayem etim. I'm going to resurrect the dead. Vehu amar le. The passerby would say, Letim chayem etim el HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only God can resurrect the dead, Gehazi. What are you doing? What are you saying? You can't speak this way. Dichtiv be, because it says about the resurrection of the dead. The verse says, Adonai memitum chayem morit sheol vayal. That God is He who gives life and resurrects. He brings those to death and raises them. The following line is not found in the Yerushalmi, but it is related in other sources. It's related in the Mechilta. The Mechilta adds this clause. Amar lahem, Gehazi responded, Af Rabbi memitum chayeh. My teacher Elisha also resurrects and brings to life. Azal v'la avet klum. He went, didn't work. The Navi says, En kol ven kashev. There was no response when Gehazi went to resurrect this kid. Amar le, in response, Gehazi was told, or excuse me, Gehazi tells the prophet Elisha, Ana yada, now I know, ilu hava demaich la have mitar al yadach. Even if I had gone and followed your instructions, it wouldn't have worked. Look, I'm doing more than I'm even supposed to do. I'm glorifying God's name in the process of resurrecting the dead, and nothing happens. The Yerushalmi quotes this whole story to show you that Gehazi was unfortunately among those who denied the resurrection of the dead and was a failed student of Elisha in this regard. Elisha ultimately, succeeded in reviving the child on his own. And you see from here that sometimes less is more, right? That's a lesson that we learn. That's a lesson that we learn already very early on uh, from the days of Adam and Chava, when the snake famously adds to the prohibition. Lo tochelu mimenu velo tige'u bo. God said, don't eat from the tree. The snake says, God said, don't touch from it either. And you touch and nothing happened, except God never said that. So it's a good lesson for us in knowing what the parameters of Jewish tradition and halakha require of us. Sometimes thinking that we are required to do more can lead to horrible and devastating consequences. Rabbeinu Bachya in his Perush, in his commentary to the Torah in Genesis chapter 30, has a totally different take on this story, by the way, but that's for reference over here and not for now. Now, to wrap this up for the sake of brevity and time, in the Epistle of James, you'll see this is the source that or the early Christians used to base the institution of confession in their doctrine and as one of their core dogmas of belief. Here you see, for example, if somebody is afflicted, let him pray. If a person is happy, let him sing psalms. In the Aramaic version of the Epistle of James, you have the term mezamer. So that could be actually read, sing a praise or psalms. It could be read either way. Is any sick among you? If you have sick people, here you have the point I want to highlight. The Epistle of James says, "Let him call the elders." In the Aramaic, you have the term keshisha, the elders of the church. By the way, that's a term that's used only in reference to the structural command of the Christian church. You don't find this title in reference to the hierarchy of the Bet Midrash or the Bet HaKnesset during the Second Temple period. It wasn't a synagogue title, it was a church title. At any rate, you have another Christian invention over here of anointing him with oil. That's not something that's typically done for healing. You don't find that done for healing anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, but it was something that was done. Some want to say it's based on the healing process of the Metzorah, of the leper, because the Torah does say that you anoint his ears and thumbs with oil, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, you see from here something very interesting. And the prayer of faith shall save the sick, and the Lord shall raise him up. Raise him up. Does that ring a bell? Like we read about Elisha doing? And if he have committed sins, they shall be forgiven him. They shall be forgiven him. If a person goes to the elders and he has been sick, going to the elders and seeking for some sort of a healing, those sins will be forgiven upon his confession. And in addition to that, the Epistle of James says, confess your faults one to another. Ben Adam lachavera. Also, when it comes to those things, you should not necessarily go to an elder, but to your fellow that you have wronged and pray for one another. In the Jewish annotated New Testament, the authors there point out that this is also a Christian feature. We're going to see that that's not true. This clause in the Epistle of James is actually very much rooted in Jewish tradition, and we're going to see that Harambam actually codifies this in Halakha. But the first two insights that the Epistle of James offers are very much Christian. They are not based in Jewish tradition by any means. In fact, in the Didachi, which is one of the earliest records of communal practice for the early church, you find that the first couple of instructions in James is not even mentioned. It's omitted. It's completely ignored. It says that on every Lord's Day, which was Shabbat, by the way, that was not Sunday like it later became, but it was on a Saturday. When you gather together, break bread, give thanksgiving, and after having confessed your transgressions, when they're together and breaking bread, you should make amends with one another. If you wronged your fellow, make it up that your sacrifice may be pure. You don't want to be on bad terms with your fellows and you're congregating with them. So, where does this idea of confession in Christian tradition come from? It actually comes hundreds of years later. One of the early church fathers, and we're not going to go through this inside, but I just wanted to bring it so people can see Origen and also Aphrahat. He's also known as Hakima Parsa'a, the Persian sage. He was of Persian extraction, They both say that a person should go to the priest of the Lord to seek a cure, like a doctor, if he has committed a sin. How this transition from going to the elders to the priest occurred, I don't know. It's not entirely clear. And then ultimately, in the year 1215, during the Fourth Lateran Council, the Catholic Church codified this into canon law, also referring to the priest as a doctor of sorts. We're going to tackle that point in 1 second. This is going to be the final point for tonight. And there are even special restrictions on which priest you're allowed to see. You have to be within a particular jurisdiction, and if not, you have to get special permission to go to another priest. Very, very interesting, but again, you see that this is, while it's something that stems from the tradition of the Nevi'im, from the tradition of the Chachamim. It deviated with the schism of the church from Am Yisrael, from the Jewish people, in two regards. A, in the fact that the confession seems to be, even if it's only for sins between you and God, the idea that you can only be cured by confessing to an elder or a priest is completely foreign. And also the idea that you have to go through some sort of a healing ritual with oil or something of this sort is also foreign to our tradition. Instead, I always give people the advice of our Chachamim. What did our rabbis teach? They said, this is a passage from the Talmud Yerushalmi again. There was a particular person, Chad barnash have ichata belishne. A particular person sinned with his tongue. He said terrible things, lashon hara. Others say that he was stuttering. Ichate belishne. According to other opinions, they read this as, he started having a speech impediment out of nowhere. Very bizarre. Ata legaber Rabbi Yochanan. He went to the great sage Rabbi Yochanan. V'shalche gaber Rabbi Hanina. He sent him to Rabbi Hanina. That's because every good rabbi knows if it's not my specialty, I'm not going to dabble in it. Rabbi Yochanan was a great Talmid Chacham. He wasn't a great healer. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was known as a great healer. So he went to Rabbi Hanina. Amar le, what was the prescription he gave this guy? Ezel, get out of here. Te'ebach. What should be with you? It should for you to be cured. You should toil in the study of the Torah. Dichtiv, as the verse in Proverbs says, Marpe lashon es chayim. That which is a cure for the tongue is the tree of life. The tree of life, of course, is the Torah. As we also read Etz chaim hi nemachazikim ba v'tomechea me'ushar. The tree of life is the Torah. To those who cling onto it, and happy and fortunate are those who support it. Maimonides in the Laws of Teshuvah in the second chapter makes a very important distinction for us. He says that it is very praiseworthy for a person who does Teshuvah, who repents from his sins, to inform the public of his sins, and to reveal that which he did wrong to his fellow, to other people. Even though I did something horrible to so-and-so and I feel terrible and awful about it, today I'm a new person. I have asked for forgiveness and I'm not going to do that again. If a person doesn't do that because he says, I'm beyond that, I don't need to reveal what I've done wrong to the public. I don't want to embarrass myself. Your teshuvah is incomplete if you think that way. Shneeman, the verse in Proverbs says, He who covers his sins will not be successful. Now, I said earlier, this is a Jewish concept. Here is something that the early church adopts, but of course we do not adopt. When does this apply? That applies to sins that you commit against your fellow human being. But if you are referring to what we call, for lack of better terms, ritual sins, those sins which are committed that are ritualistic between you and God, that you shouldn't be publicizing that stuff. It's like a self-righteous and haughty if you do that. It's not right. You shouldn't be doing that. I'll end off with a final note. There's more that I wanted to cover, but there's a case for Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg of the 20th century, a great posek. He writes that even in a case where a person feels like something's embarrassing, if it's between and perhaps not even sinful, but if it relates to you and your fellow human being because they need to know, then you have to reveal it to them. They need to know. Here, Rav Waldenberg writes about a case. He was the rabbi, the posek of the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Israel. And he was asked about a woman who was going to get married, and she had working ovaries, but she had no uterus or vaginal canal, at least not one that was naturally occurring. And she didn't want to have to, reveal this. It was very sore subject for her. And Rav Waldenberg says that this information, despite being, uh, you know, protected by HIPAA law, he says the doctor should ideally go with the fiance, and he should, if the doctor wants to share this information, he has to do a hatarat nadarim. He has to seek annulment of the vow of the Hippocratic oath to be able to share this information. That's a chidush, by the way. A lot of doctors don't think about that when they get consent to share information. But yeah, it's a Hippocratic oath. You have to do hatarat nadarim. And he says that it should be explained to the woman in a gentle and calm manner. You shouldn't just get a dispensation to share the confidential information and leave it at that. Rav Waldenberg was a sensitive man. Part of Jewish law also entails sharing confidential information in a way that it will be well received by the recipient. Um, but yeah, that's the final point that we'll end off with is a point shared by Rabbeinu Abraham. Rabbeinu Abraham, the son of Harambam, relates in his commentary to the passage that we actually read last week, when the Torah says that you will be unto me, the Jewish people, you will be a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You will be a nation of kings, of priests, excuse me, in a holy nation. What does this mean? Rabbeinu Avraham provides a number of interpretations, but one interpretation he offers is as follows: V'sof zehu, you can sum up this discussion of what it means to be a kingdom of priests. Ki bechol eda ba'alei pulchan chasidim ufarushim. In every organized group of people, you will find among them those who are particularly well versed in the religion, who are overly pious, and monks that are among them. Afilu ben of the avodah zarah, even among pagan people. וכך כעת הכומרים בין אנשי הודו ובין הנוצרים. You find this among Buddhist monks and Christian monks. They're very ascetic. They have their monasteries, and they're secluded and relegated to the monastery, free of the worries of day-to-day affairs, and not really connected with the world. And the other, everyday people, the lay people, the laity of these people groups think that they could go and just do whatever they want, and they can commit all sorts of sins, and the priests, they do what they do and they'll atone for us. ואל יטה אותך במצב העדה המתמידה לנו, מי שמחיקה אותנו. Rabbeinu Harambam says, don't think that this reality should permeate the Jewish people. That's why God tells us, tiyu kedoshim. Each and every one of you should be what? Holy. What does it mean to be holy? Lo yiyu ketzatchem chasidim ufarushim uketzatchem menafim uposheim. There shouldn't be among the Jewish people those who are, they think that only I am holy and designated for religious purpose, and people can come to me and confide in me. Bringing this back home to our main topic, we don't believe in confession, and confidentiality applies to quote unquote priests, or in our case, to the rabbi. It is the responsibility of every single Jew to be an arev, to be a guarantor for his fellow. Kol Yisrael arevim zelazeh. Ki Yisrael kulam chayavim b'mitzvot kulan. Each and every Jew is responsible for upholding and preserving the entirety of the Torah and all of the commandments. And so with that, I will leave the floor open to questions, if anyone has any questions with the time that we have.
Thank you, Rav, for that very interesting presentation. If anyone, I see Rina.
Hi, thank you. Wonderful, Rabbi Z. Thank you, Ohad. I have a question with regards to the Lashon Hara, or maybe, when something is spoken to you, if you're not sure if it's in confidentiality or not. And then what, like, I feel like I've read somewhere that there's like the burden of the listener when you feel like it's, if it's shaming, maybe unintentional or not intentional, but you feel like it was a bit reducing, and maybe, you're going to be faced with what was said to you, with maybe treating the party that, was the subject, treating them with a different kind of bias or in a different light. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, this is a topic that is actually addressed by the Rishonim. Just offhand, I recall uh, an approach that was offered by Rabbeinu Asher in his commentary to Masechet Nida. There's a whole discussion about Gedaliah Bar Ahikam, the famous incident of Gedaliah and Ishmael, the governor at the time, the governor of Israel, and reports of a plot that was being um, or excuse me, Ishmael wanting to carry out a plot against Gedaliah, the governor, to execute him because Ishmael envied that he was governor and Gedaliah was hesitant to accept the Lashon Hara. And so, ultimately he died, and you get the terrible, commemoration of this event with the fast of Gedaliah every year, right after Rosh Hashanah, a horrible tragedy. Rabbeinu Asher says in that episode, there were two errors made. Obviously, Ishmael made the error of thinking that it's okay to murder, a leader of the Jewish people. But Gedaliah also made an error in judgment in not acting more prudently with the quote unquote Lashon Hara. It's not really Lashon Hara because his life was at stake. So here, Rabbeinu Asher gives us a rule of thumb. When it comes to reports of danger that don't have two eyewitnesses reporting to you, you have to act prudently to protect your life, but you also cannot necessarily treat that person as as conspiring to murder
Mhm.
because you don't have two witnesses to verify those facts like Halakha requires. So the same would also apply to some degree when a person is not in danger, right? If you have reports of somebody who did something or somebody's venting to you about something, that doesn't give you an excuse to treat the third party that's being spoken about in a different light. And that's easier said than done, but it is what halakha requires of us. I think that's what you were asking, and I think I answered it.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, because and that's when I read when it said the burden of the listener, because I mean you can almost like try to forget what you see, but as far as what's being said to you, I feel like that's just really, really hard to
Look, it's not easy. It's nobody said that's easy, but it's a goal that we have to aspire to if we're going to actually be trusted to hear the secrets of others.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So, bottom line, also, just make an important emphasis over here is that the rabbi also doesn't relieve people of their sins when you come and confess. We're not Catholic priests over here, but he certainly can serve as an outlet, and all of us can serve as outlets for each other. Any other questions?
Thank you, Rav, and thank you, everyone. I'm sure there's lots of points. Just for the sake of time,
Absolutely.
we'll bring it to an end for tonight. But I can attest that the Rav is very amenable to contact and to questions and to reaching out. So everyone, I'm volunteering you on everyone's on my behalf on everyone's behalf here. Feel free to reach out to the Rav. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Nela Tov, and thank you, Rav, for a very interesting shoot.
Thank you. Wonderful evening, everyone.
Bye bye.